Chapter 19. Finding Faith in the Roman Empire around the year 200. Part 3. Neoplatonism, Stoicism, and Epicureanism. Written and produced by Thomas Tyseal. Copyright Thomas Tyseal unless otherwise noted. Before we dive into early 3rd century philosophy in Rome, we should review some of the foundations regarding 3 big Greek theological terms: logos, nous, and aphoria, divine emanations. Recall Heraclitus from chapter 8, the weeping philosopher from Ephesus. Way back around 500 BCE, Heraclitus taught that logos was the rational law governing the universe. Though it is often translated as word, logos literally means speech, and it refers to the reasoned explanation given through speech. Heraclitus wrote, "Though this logos is true evermore, yet men are as unable to understand it when they hear it for the first time as before they have heard it at all. For though all things come to pass in accordance with this logos, men seem as if they had no experience of them." Further, he explained, "For all human laws are fed by the one divine law, this word or reason. It prevails as much as it will and suffices for all things, with something to spare." Recall from chapter 16 that Laozi, Heraclitus's near contemporary, would call this logos the Tao, the mother of us all, the source of heaven, earth, and all things, the natural law from which all things arise. Like the logos of Heraclitus, which orders all things, Laozi explained that through the Tao, the incomplete becomes whole, the crooked straight, the hollow full, the worn out becomes new. So, in both the East and the West, thought was advancing about the perfecting force guiding all things. About 100 years after Heraclitus, Plato taught that logos was how the divine mind, nous, became intelligible, how we reason it operates. He wrote, "We must try to give an account, logos, of each thing according to its nature." To Plato, logos was a human, not a divine property. The divine property was nous, the divine mind, which through the demiurge, the active principle of nous, used the eternal forms as a guide to structure the material world. Plato wrote, "The maker and father of this universe, that is, the divine mind nous, looked to what is eternal, the forms, and used it as a model, and thus made the universe beautiful." In such a way, Plato taught, the nous came to be in the human soul, as everything was fashioned from and by the divine mind. He wrote, "Nous came to be in soul in body, and thus the universe was constructed as a living creature, endowed with soul and intelligence." The nous within us causes us, Plato taught, to strive toward perfection. He wrote, "Intellect, that is nous, prevailed over necessity by persuading it to direct most of what comes to be toward what is best." Note that in terms of function, what Heraclitus called logos, Plato called nous, the divine mind. And like Laozi's Tao, it had the ability to draw things towards perfection. About 400 years after Plato, Philo of Alexandria, who lived from 20 BCE to 50 of the Common Era, took Heraclitus's view of logos and merged it with Jewish theology, establishing logos as the mediator between a transcendent God and the material world. Philo wrote, God, by the Logos, fashioned the universe, for the Logos is the firstborn of God, the pattern of all things, through which everything was made. Logos was essential because God was held to be perfect, unknowable, and constant. Change would violate this understanding, and thus an intermediary was needed. Philo wrote, "He who is above all things could not come into contact with matter. It is by the Logos, the instrument of God, that the universe is brought into being." And he wrote, "The Logos is the shadow of God's reality. The Logos stands between God and the world, revealing the eternal without being God himself." The difference between God and Logos is like the difference between yourself, which is constant, and purposeful thought, which changes. You've seen in the last section how for many Christian Gnostics, Logos was one of the 8 subordinate divine emanations radiating from the Godhead. Logos was an idea that had to be paired with life to create, and these 2 emanations created the form of the archetypal man, which had to be animated by the female spirit of the church. You can see in this the Yin and Yang principles from ancient China, once again a symmetry between East and West. This brings us to Plotinus, a Greek philosopher living in Egypt who lived from 204 to 270 of the Common Era, in the time period we are now considering. Plotinus is famous for fashioning Plato's ideas into Neoplatonism. Plotinus extracted and amplified 3 big ideas from Plato. He understood the good in Plato's The Republic as the one in Plato's Parmenides. This one is simple, beyond being, and the source of reality. Following Plato, he held it as simple because if it had parts, parts would be prior in explanation to the whole. It had to be beyond being because being implies something known and structured, that is, with parts. And the one is prior to anything known and has no parts. Because of this, Plotinus, like Hindus, Buddhists, and Plato, held that the one cannot be described by language. We can only say what God is not. Finally, the one is the source of all reality, as you can also see in the Hebrew Bible, in Psalms, Isaiah, Nehemiah, and Romans of the New Testament. Continuing, thought from Heraclitus and Philo, Plotinus taught that Logos was the rational structure or law governing the universe. He reasoned that a divine mind, also known as intellect, reason, or Logos, emanated from the one in a natural overflowing process. As per Plato, he reasoned that whatever properties things have, they have owing to there being forms for these in the divine mind, and that Plato's demiurge used these to fashion creation. Plotinus was the earliest philosopher to lay out a coherent, fully developed theory of emanationism. Plotinus defined the soul as the principle of desire for objects that are external to it. As with Plato and Aristotle, Plotinus held that everything with a soul, from human beings to the most insignificant plant, desired something greater or beyond it. Plotinus had a major influence on later Christian thinkers, including Origen, Athanasius, Augustine, and Pseudo-Dionysius. The diagram at right shows a Neoplatonic view of reality. There are three fundamental realities, or hypostases. Each diminishes in spiritual vitality as they are progressively further from the one. The first hypostasis is the one, that is, absolute reality, God. The second is the divine mind, Nous, intellect, reason, or word, logos, which emanates from the one. It's the realm of the craftsman, demiurge. The third is the world soul, which emanates from the divine mind and is the animating spirit connecting all living things. The physical world we sense emanates from the world soul, which copies Platonic forms in the divine mind. We know of one God through transcendence. You can see in this the classical Christian view that reality is structured with God, the one, on the top, angels, immaterial created beings below this, then the world of human souls, then material creation. As to the cause of spiritual advancement, and again reflecting Plato and Aristotle, Plotinus argued in the Aeneid that all things desire to return to their source, the one. In Rome, if you were attracted to philosophy but didn't want to become a Neoplatonist, you could become a Stoic. In modern usage, being a Stoic often carries the connotation of being unresponsive or seeming lifeless. That's not a true representation of Stoicism. Stoicism started with the Greek philosopher Zeno of Citium, who would have been about 15 when Aristotle died. Zeno taught on the painted porch, the Stoa Poikili of the Agora, a public gathering place in Athens. The name Stoic comes from the porch where Zeno taught. Only fragments and quotations preserved by later authors have survived of Zeno's teachings. Here's a few of these quotations. The goal of life is living in agreement with nature. This, of course, aligns perfectly with what we've seen in Taoism and in other religions too, as nature is guided by divine reason. Zeno taught that our individual life is a part of the entire cosmos, governed by the universal reason, logos. Echoing a bit of what the Buddha taught, that feelings arise when the senses, the mind, and consciousness fix on an object and produce a feeling, which then produces a destructive craving, Zeno wrote that a bad feeling is a commotion of the mind repugnant to reason and against nature. Aligning with all religions, Stoicism is a deeply moral practice. Zeno explained, man conquers the world by conquering himself, and man's proper work is the practice of the virtues which alone produce happiness. In this pursuit, he taught the importance of being content with what one has, writing, "He who is greedy is always in want." Unlike Plato, we know from Zeno's contemporary Diogenes Laertius that early Stoics believed that only material bodies exist, for only material bodies can act or be acted upon. Thus, to early Stoics, God and the soul, if they exist, must be material to have effect. Similarly, we know from Diogenes that Zeno was a monist, believing that everything is made up of only one thing, a divine fiery breath, pneuma. This in agreement with what Anaximenes a few hundred years earlier had taught. The third head of Zeno's famous school in Athens, Chrysippus, systemized this doctrine of pneuma and taught that primordial pneuma had 4 possible qualities: cohesion, which holds matter together in varying degrees, nature, which makes some things alive, soul, which gives perception and movement, and logos, which gives reason. Only humans, he believed, have all four. Zeno also taught that all things are made of active and passive components. Matter, earth, wind, water, and fire, not the primordial fire just mentioned, but earthly fire, is the passive component. The active component is God, the non-personal, but nevertheless rational, animating force shaping the passive component into forms according to its reason, logos, and breath, pneuma. The world is thus made up of God, an active material, and matter, a passive material. The Stoic belief that only matter exists causes us to ask, what about the void, time, thoughts, and the soul, all immaterial things which seem to exist? We know from Diogenes that Zeno and the early Stoics taught that the void exists outside the whole, that is, our cosmos, which is unlimited, but that there is no void within the cosmos, for the whole is entirely filled. Chrysippus further explained that even if bodies are divisible, they admit no internal void because the pneuma that binds them leaves no gaps. Believe it or not, this is exactly what modern science says. What we think of as empty space, even the smallest empty space, is actually filled with electromagnetic fields and billions of virtual particles coming into and out of existence. As to time, a fragment from Zeno says that time is the dimension of motion, thus joining the concepts of space in which motion occurs and time, thousands of years before Einstein. Chrysippus further explained that time is the interval of the cosmos motion, which subsists, though it is not a body. Being subsistent, time is dependent on the motion of objects. As to thought, Chrysippus viewed it as an alteration of the ruling part, that is, an imprint on the pneuma of soul. And the soul, Diogenes says, quoting Zeno, is a body, a warm breath by which we live and perceive. These are fascinating thoughts to consider. Chrysippus, the aforementioned third head of Zeno's Stoic school in Athens, made major contributions to Stoicism. Prior to Chrysippus, logical reasoning was done by assessing the categories of terms. For example, consider the terms mammals, animals, and cats. If we assert the proposition that all mammals are animals and all cats are mammals, then we know that all cats are animals. This is the form of logic used by Aristotle. All A are B, all B are C, therefore all A are C. This is called a categorical syllogism, and if the first two propositions are true, and the second term in the first proposition is the first term in the second, then the third proposition is necessarily true. Chrysippus developed a more robust form of propositional logic. The proposition called modus ponens can be symbolized: if P, then Q. P is, therefore Q. For example, if today is Tuesday, then John will go to work. Today is Tuesday, therefore John will go to work. Note that this has nothing to do with the categories of terms. Though he wrote a lot, very little of Chrysippus' writings have survived, but his system of propositional logic is known to have been used by Stoics to determine what is reasonable to believe. A few fascinating quotes of Chrysippus are shown here. The universe itself is God, and the universal outpouring of its soul. This quote is an extension of the beliefs of pre-Socratic philosophers and resonates both with Taoism and the naturalism we'll see when we study Spinoza. And in a quote that sums up the work of any true philosopher, "If I followed the multitude, I should not have studied philosophy." And nothing happens without a cause. Everything is bound together by fate. Stoics adopted the 4 cardinal virtues of Socrates: wisdom, focusing on what you can control, not on what you cannot; courage, addressing life's challenges without losing your principles; temperance, exercising self-control and discipline; and justice, acting in a way that benefits people. These 4 virtues are described in books 2 and 4 of Plato's Republic, and Stoics, especially Epicurus, viewed Socrates as the model for the ideal man who combined these 4 virtues. They viewed these 4 virtues as all necessary and together sufficient for living a life in harmony with nature. Thus, the virtues were not just psychological constructs, but components of universal reason, the divine mind. The painting it left from an unknown artist demonstrates a synergy between Greeks and Hebrews. In it, the Hebrew King David is playing a harp surrounded by bodyguards and musicians. The labeled 4 corners list the 4 cardinal virtues of Socrates. If you were in Rome around the year 200, the writings of the Roman Stoic philosopher and playwright Seneca, who lived from 4 BCE to 65 CE, would have been widely available. A painting of him by Peter Paul Rubens is shown here. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future, not to amuse ourselves with either hopes or fears, but to rest satisfied with what we have, which is sufficient, for he that is so wants nothing. The greatest blessings of mankind are within us and within our reach. A wise man is content with his lot, whatever it may be, without wishing for what he has not." Buddha would have been pleased. Of the previously mentioned 4 virtues, Seneca wrote, "The virtues are inseparable. No one can possess one of them without possessing them all." And that wisdom is the mother of all the virtues. From it are born justice, courage, and self-control. The 1871 painting here from Manuel Dominguez de Sanchez in the Prado Museum shows Seneca lying dead in a bath where he had taken his life. The Emperor Nero had ordered his suicide as he suspected Seneca, his former teacher, of plotting against him. One investigating beliefs in Rome around the year 200 may also have encountered a Stoic masterpiece, now known as Meditations. The book of around 200 pages was written in Greek by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, known to us simply as Marcus Aurelius. Marcus wrote the book while on defensive military campaigns against invading Germans and Sarmatians between 170 and 180 of the Common Era. There's uncommon wisdom in this book, especially for a Roman emperor. Of the 4 virtues he wrote, "Let your mind dwell on the qualities of those who lived with virtue, on their prudence, their justice, their temperance, their courage." Marcus covered a wide range of topics, all extensions of what Stoics would have called wisdom and its associated virtues. On logic, reason, and love, he wrote, "To investigate and analyze with understanding and logic the principles we ought to live by, not to display anger or other emotions, to be free of passion and yet full of love." On justice, ethics, and destiny, he wrote, indifference to external events, and commitment to justice in your own acts, which means thought and action resulting in the common good, what you were born to do. On disciplining your thoughts, he wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people unless it affects the common good. It will keep you from doing anything useful. All of this sounds like very good advice. On wisdom, temperance, self-control, and love, Aurelius wrote, "When people injure you, ask yourself what good or harm they thought would come of it. If you understand that, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage or anger. Your sense of good and evil may be the same as theirs, or near it, in which case you have to excuse them. Or your sense of good and evil may differ from theirs, in which case they're misguided and deserve your compassion. Is that so hard? Neither can I be angry with my brother or foul fall of him, for he and I were born to work together like a man's 2 hands, feet, or eyelids, or the upper and lower rows of his teeth. To obstruct each other is against nature's law, and what is irritation or aversion but a form of obstruction? Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. Not to display anger or other emotions, to be free of passion, and yet full of love. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." What marvelous quotes. Here's some quotes from Aurelius that lean toward Daoist and Buddhist teachings. "The world is nothing but change. Our life is only perception. Some things are rushing into existence, others out of it. Some of what now exists is already gone. Change and flux constantly remake the world, just as the incessant progression of time remakes eternity. If you seek tranquility, do less, or, more accurately, do what's essential, what the logos of a social being requires, and in the requisite way, which brings a double satisfaction to do less better. Because most of what we say and do is not essential. If you can eliminate it, you have more time and more tranquility. Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? There is clearly much to commend Stoicism. Its focus on controlling passions, practicing virtues, and being guided by logic. Its goal to live in harmony with nature, to be content with little, and to focus on the common good. All these are in line with what we know as the best of religion. Its metaphysical views are also worth considering. Could it be that God must have material attributes to cause any effect, and that God is no different from pneuma, the rational, ethereal, breath-like substance that animates all nature and is inseparable from it? If so, then everything is truly related to this one ethereal, material substance, and our job is to align with its rationality and in that way experience happiness. It's a lot to think about. There are also some differences from religion to consider. Stoicism is a reasoned belief system assembled by men, not a revelation. It was constructed by philosophers, not a revolutionary, charismatic leader moved by the hand of the Almighty, whether inside or outside of creation. And we must consider the implications of its metaphysical claims. If God is nature, It is also pestilence, disease, famines, and the law of the jungle where only the strong survive. And it provides no justice beyond that which nature provides. In stressing contentment with one station, it may lead to resignation and stagnation, and if everything is governed by fate, praise and blame are meaningless, and it's hard to hold someone morally accountable for their actions. While we ponder these things, let's consider a philosophy that was not as popular in Rome as Stoicism around the year 200, Epicureanism. Epicurus was born in 341 BCE on the Aegean island of Samos, 9 years after Plato died and 7 years before Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, was born. He died in Athens in 270 BCE. Epicureanism begins with what seems an innocuous and true observation, that it is through our senses that we attain knowledge. Epicurus taught that if our senses do not confirm a belief, we must disregard it. Thus the senses trump the mind, and if the senses deliver false information, it's the fault of the mind for misinterpreting sense data. Trusting the senses leads us to the belief that what brings us pleasure is good and our natural state, and what brings pain is bad and to be avoided. Epicurus wrote, "For this reason we say that pleasure is the beginning and the end of living happily." It's easy to misunderstand Epicureanism if you don't understand the limits Epicurus specified on pleasure. He wrote, "No pleasure is in itself evil, but the things which produce certain pleasures entail annoyances many times greater than the pleasures themselves." In other words, too much pleasure often brings consequences much worse than the initial beneficial pleasure. Continuing, he wrote, "It is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and honorably and justly, and it is impossible to live wisely and honorably and justly without living pleasantly." Note that this is very much aligned with Stoic belief. Epicurus was not an unrestrained pleasure seeker, but a proponent of moderate, wise, and just living. He wrote, "The wealth demanded by nature is both limited and easily procured. That demanded by idle imaginings stretches on to infinity." Epicurus also believed in God, writing, "First believe that a God is a living being, immortal and blessed, according to the common notion of a God, and do not attribute to him anything foreign to immortality or inconsistent with blessedness." He did not, however, believe what people often said about the gods. He did not believe that the gods caused us pain, writing, "A blessed and immortal being knows no trouble itself, nor causes trouble to any other, so it is not affected by anger or favor, for all such things belong to weakness." Thus he wrote, "Don't fear God. Don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get. What is terrible is easy to endure." There's no afterlife here, no judgment, just nothing. He explained, "Accustom yourself to the belief that death is nothing to us, for death is the privation of all consciousness, and mind and spirit are born together with the body, grow with it, and decay with it." In contrast to the Stoics, Epicurus believed that there were two fundamental realities, matter and a void, in which matter moved. As to matter, he sided with Democritus, who held that matter was made of atoms. Epicurus believed that there was a finite number of kinds of atoms, but an infinite number of atoms, and thus matter and the void were both infinite. As Democritus held that atoms were indivisible, he held that they must also be eternal. Thus the universe and the void were also eternal. Atoms move by chance, and in their collision with other atoms form substances without the need for divine intervention. As to the soul, like the Stoics, he believed it was made of delicate material atoms. He wrote, "The soul is a body of fine particles, distributed throughout the whole organism, and most resembling wind mixed with heat. And the soul has no power of sensation apart from the body, and when the body is dissolved, the soul is dissolved with it." Well, did philosophy do it for you as a belief system? If not, let's try another belief system very popular in Rome around the year 200. Next up, Mithraism.